Today was CEDAW's half day of general discussion for their concept note on trafficking, leading to their draft and general recommendation on trafficking.
The committee had produced a draft concept note which outlined their perspective on how they think the general recommendation should go.
General recommendations are usually authorized interpretations of articles. They're not always stuck to or limited to the scope of an article. Sometimes they're thematic. But in this occasion, the committee took on trafficking because it had already dealt historically with migration and other topics that were related to trafficking. But because of all the tensions around trafficking and sex work and migration, they didn't decide to take on trafficking until now. This general recommendation is a very good opportunity for the CEDAW Committee to reframe its approach to trafficking, because it's been very centered and very focused on criminalization, border control, and sort of like criminal justice measures as anti-trafficking measures. And that has limited really the scope of of state obligations related to trafficking. So this is the perfect opportunity for the CEDAW Committee to really have a rights-based approach where there is the recognition of rights of migrants and migrant workers, and where the state's obligation related to that, and what would be eventually the accountability mechanisms for migrants in relation to states, because that's actually something that is not very clear under the current trafficking framework.
The submission the SRI made, after discussing with sex work groups themselves, focused on the definition that the committee used, which is based from a protocol that looked at transnational organized crime, which is where the first definition of trafficking came. And the definition did not take into account the consent of the woman involved when one is considered trafficked. The second thing that was important for us to highlight was that trafficking, because of the way the definition from the protocol came about, is always seen conflated with sex work, irrespective of the women themselves who are engaged in sex work, and irrespective of the sex work movements across the world talking about their right to work as sex workers. And often that is completely not seen, and the entire movement of sex workers is invisibilized. Today, we were at the UN, where everybody who'd made written submissions and who wanted to make oral submissions to the CEDAW Committee were given an opportunity to make that submission. The SRI also made a statement based on the submission that we have made, which is available on the website of the CEDAW Committee, which dealt with precisely the right of sex workers to talk about themselves, and that sex work is work, and that the idea of looking at trafficking without listening to voices of women who are affected by trafficking is reductive and is not in line with the human rights framework that has been set by the CEDAW Committee and many other human rights bodies. Also, importantly, it highlighted that often states and others use the crime control mechanism as a way to perpetuate their own racist, xenophobic, anti-migrant ideologies, but then claim to be saving these victims who they'd never bothered to listen to when they save them and when they rescue them. But to me, today, the highlight of today was the space in the UN where sex workers were present, where sex workers claimed the space that is their own, that is the UN, to say that sex work is work and people should start listening to sex workers. And that was the highlight of the day.